Welcome into the Grace Point Daily Podcast. My name is Jeremiah Johnson. This is going to be a verse-by-verse edition with Dr. R.B. Maynard. So thank you for joining us on the Grace Point Daily Podcast. We exist to bring you daily encouragement for your daily walk with Christ. So you now not only get to hear the audio, but we are available on Facebook Live every time we do it. So Dr. R.B. Maynard, how are you, sir?
It makes me really nervous to be live.
We got to, now we got to get step up our budget because we're going to have to get makeup people.
I know. Hair. How does my hair
look?
To
the staff. So anyway, Stella will be happy about that. We'll buy all our products from her. So.
Yes.
Or get sponsored by her, one of the two.
Yeah, there you go. Sponsor this video, sponsored by State Beauty Supply.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you listening to the Grace One Daily Podcast. We're trying to get some, it's on me. I need to get some other things going on. I do have some other podcasts lined up. Hope you check that out. Grace Point with Greg and Kelly, they finally snuck one in last week. So please listen, share the Grace Point Daily Podcast with someone that you know we really, really appreciate it, or watch it on Facebook Live. We appreciate that as well. And so anyway, Dr. R.B. Maynard, we celebrated this a couple of weeks ago now, but we went between Grace Point Daily Podcast and the Modern Christian Dads Podcast, two podcasts we host here at Grace Point, our local church. We went over the 10,000 play mark, the 10K play mark.
10,000.
So we are super excited about that. And so we were talking, Pastor Greg and I, that, I don't think a lot of people understand that it's a great tool for us as a church, that we could, in a sense, because Modern Christian Dads, we do joke around, but we have spiritual truth and we do spiritual things here on Grace Point Daily, but we could almost categorize it as missions.
Right.
Because in each of those podcasts, I think it's been listened to at least one time in both categories, 16 different countries, 16 countries in Modern Christian Dads, I think 15 or 16 in the Grace Point Daily as well. Right. And they're not the same countries either.
Right.
We actually have Samuel Darla, hello from India, listening right now. He chiming in there, giving a comment. So,
yeah, I see his name on Wake Up Grace Point, several different things.
So you never know. And so we want our church to continue to help promote and support the Grace One Daily Podcast. I think it sounds pretty good. We're up on our games, video, audio, great quality. We want it to be the best we want it to be better than Joe Rogan's podcast.
Right.
Because he just swears and smokes weed on his, so among other immoral things. So
right.
And he just signed an exclusive $100 million deal with Spotify for his podcast rights.
It's amazing that many people are listening, really. I mean,
$100 million exclusive Spotify deal. So Spotify, if you are listening to the Grace Point Daily Podcast, we don't want that money because we got Jesus, so we don't need all that.
Right.
That, we'll take
it.
two to five, and that, I think that'd be reasonable.
Right.
2 to 5 million, that is, to clarify. So, but it does just shows you how popular podcasting is in the world today, that contracts like that are being signed and now the exclusive deals, that's what I find very interesting. So Joe Rogan had like the most popular podcast in the world, but now, the owning the exclusive rights, Spotify exclusive, which we are on Spotify. We're on Apple iTunes. We're on all those Stitcher, all those podcast platforms. You can find Grace Point Daily or Modern Christian Dads. What I was trying to get to that is, are you going to be in church June 28th? You're going to be at church, attending church?
As far as I know.
Okay. Because I'm going to have a special 10K celebration, of which there will be some presentations made, and I have one for you that day, so I want you to make sure that you come. Right. All right, verse by verse, enough of that. Verse by verse, we go through the Word each and every week, so we want you to get out your Bible, your mobile device, whatever it is, get into the Word. We are here now in 1Kings chapter 15.
Yes, we are. Here we go. The first verse, and I want to say, because Stella even mentioned the other night about how confusing all this gets, because this guy was king and then this guy was king, and and you're talking about two different kingdoms, the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, and this guy was king of this, and then it'll say in the 20th year this guy became king, and it's like, well, I thought the other guy was king. Well, he's king of the other tribe, and this one's the king of. So it does get confusing. Even as I read through and teach, I get lost in it. So you may have to sit down and make yourself a graph of some kind to keep up with who all these kings are. And it starts out in chapter 15 with that very thing. It says, in the 18th year of the reign of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, Abijah became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 years. And his mother's name was Maacah, daughter of this, it says Abba Shalom, but it was Absalom, the same same that we've heard and read about before. But it mentions her name. She's been a bad influence on her son, and that's the only reason it's mentioned. It's kind of sad that would be why your parent was mentioned, not like, oh, your mom was a great lady, she raised a great son. It mentions the mother because of the fact that she was not very good. And the thing about it for her, she had, and we talked about this Wednesday night because our Wednesday night and our podcast are overlapping a little bit, but her influence, she was not the daughter of a heathen nation. She was not raised in idolatry. She was a granddaughter of King David. She was raised in Jerusalem around all the holy things, but yet she was an unholy woman. She was a idol worshiper. And so it's just amazing sometimes when we talk about how people can be raised in the church. Mm-hmm. And I know there's people who get burnt out on church sometimes, or that's what they say is their reason that they quit. And I heard people say, well, if you make your kids go to church, now especially like teenagers, mm-hmm. Obviously your little ones, they can't stay home, they have to go to church.
Yes.
But people, well, if you make them go to church when they get older, they won't go to church, and that's just simply not true.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
I was raised in the church. We went to church every time the doors were open, mm-hmm. and I still love the church. Yeah. And my boys were raised in church, and I told them, especially as they got older and they were going to college and still at home, and I pulled the old, as long as you live under my roof, But I did say, I said, if you guys decide that you're going to have a lifestyle of drinking and partying and stuff, I said, you come up or come in at 3:00 in the morning, I'm waking you up for church, mm-hmm. So, and they still go to church. Yeah. And their kids go to church. And, so I don't believe that. Now, and in this case, she had every opportunity to do the right thing, mm-hmm. being raised right, being close to the things that were holy, living in Jerusalem, all those things, and still being a bad influence on her kids, on her son. And so
I'm always amazed, and it's a tangent we could go on, which could be controversial, but I'm amazed at parents that have kids that are like 14 and 15, and mm-hmm. they're like church, like it's optional that they get to decide what they want to do.
I know.
I'm confused. How is that optional? Like if my 14-year-old, I have 16 and 17-year-old now. It's like if they're like, no, you go to church. That's kind of how it goes.
Well, and I've always said if
the Bible says children obey your parents. So
yeah. Well, and if you're raised in the church and for whatever reason your kids just absolutely hate the youth group or whatever it may be, then find another place for them. Yeah. I don't mean hop around churches, but you know what I mean. Yep. I'd rather my kids if they would go to church someplace that they loved, as opposed to being forced to go to a place that they hate, then hey, I'm all for that. But anyway,
you forced Stella to go to Grace Point. So
I did. I stole her away. Yeah. Don't bring that up again. Right. That's bad. But anyway, she was notorious for idolatry. So having every opportunity, but her claim to fame was in idolatry. 15:3, that was 1 and 2. 15:3, he committed all the sins his father had done before him. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David, his forefather, had been. So, the old phrase, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But and we usually have some attributes of our parents, following the Lord and different things that we learn. And people will say, I'll never do what my dad did. My dad was a alcoholic. My dad cheated on my mom. My dad, beat on us kids, and I'll never do that. But it is amazing in society how many times that those things get repeated. That son who said he would never do that grows up to be an alcoholic, or he grows up to be a wife beater, or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it's saying here. He committed all the sins his father had done before him. I'm not sure he didn't sit around and say, well, I'll never do what my dad did. But then it says that's exactly what he did. And we have that same thing. He was not fully devoted as the heart of David, his forefather, had been. I bet people got sick and tired of hearing about David. Why can't you be more like David? Why can't you be more like your brother or your cousin, or as some of these things were? And people probably got tired of hearing about David. Why can't you be more like whoever it is in your life? So they probably got sick of hearing about it. And it's not about, for us, because we can look at some of these holy people and say, I can't live up to that. I could look at a Brother Graham, this great man of God, and I could say, man, I wish I was more like him, but I can't live up to that kind of a standard. And I don't mean to place him on, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
And
oh yeah, you get around some of those godly people in our sphere of influence, Ron Blavel, people like that are just they seem like God almost.
I know.
I know they're not God, but you're just like, well, they're so spiritual.
Yeah. Well, the whole idea is that with these guys, when it brings people up like that, the Billy Grahams in our time, the guys who are known for their spirituality, it's really saying to us, I'm not expecting you to live that good of a life. You're a different person, but it's saying it's possible. It's possible to live that close to God. It's possible to live close enough to God that you pray and read the Word and have compassion on people and all those great things of these people that we talk about. So 15:4 says, nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by raising up a son to succeed him and by making Jerusalem strong. And again, those words, for David's sake. And I made a little note here because I've seen this happen in the years of the church too. We want to take credit sometimes for what David did. In other words, I'm David's son or I'm David's grandson, and we built a temple and we did these things. And I find it, I've always found it interesting in the church when people will go to a church their whole life and then they leave, and they go someplace else. And as soon as they get to the other church, well, we're building a new church and we're doing, and it's like, you've had nothing, that church has become what it is by years and years of sacrifice and prayer and giving, and now all of a sudden you're part of the we.
Yep. In sports, it's the classic. I'm a Lakers fan. Can I say, oh man, we're going to win the NBA's back. We're going to win it this year. Yep. We're going to do it. We're going to be hosting that. Wait, Jeremiah, you're not playing. You're not doing anything. You're just. I know, but me and LeBron, we're boys, okay?
So. My team.
Come on, LeBron, you can do it.
My team won this year, so 15-5.
Golden State will be sitting at home for the duration.
Yes, they will.
Of the year,
you don't have to rub that in.
That's what they get for
because I'm not a LeBron
intentionally
fan, so,
tanking to try and get a good draft pick, Rick Maynard.
Yeah, I know.
That's a different podcast. Sorry.
Yeah. Let's move on. 15:5, for David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. And this would have been one of those things if you had not read the whole verse, when it says, for David had done what was right in the eyes of the Lord and not failed to keep any of the Lord's commands all the days of his life. Most people would like to just stop right there about if you were plugging your own name in there. Rick has done everything his whole life. Pastor Jeremiah has done everything his whole life. But unfortunately, and again, I talked about this a lot on Wednesday night, I have some accept moments in my life. I have those times where it's like, I've done right, or somebody has said, man, I admire you for going to church all the time. I admire you for staying in the church or something like that. But, I might say, yeah, I did that, except.
If you only knew.
I had this other big problem over here on the side that some know about and some don't know about or whatever. So it's those accept moments. And for David, I mean, when you hate it, I do hate it. I hate it that I've lived my life really for the Lord. I mean, yes, I've gone down the path, I've gotten off the straight path, and I've done, like all of us, have done some wrong things. But then I have some of those big moments, things that I've done that, the regrets, I'm glad for the lesson I learned, but I wish I could have learned the lesson without doing what I did.
Yes.
That's, I wish I had the wisdom without having to experience that bad moment in my life.
Right.
And so,
and I wish there, I appreciate the overall perspective the Bible presents of David, in the sense that he's still held in such honor and high esteem, man after God's own heart. But we still get to see the realness of his life, like that God didn't pocket that story of Bathsheba or Uriah in that case. And I wish there was a little bit more realness in the church overall, because I think we have to, even for myself as a leader, always present like you are spiritual. And I'm sure maybe there's not, even if it's not a Uriah moment, we can take the most spiritual person that you could think of, and you don't know the depths of their life. You don't know that because the Bible says anger, puts anger and lumps it later on in the New Testament, would lump it with, immorality and things of that nature. And so we don't know that those people don't have some real struggles that if we sat down, could just find the hidden camera of their entire life and be like, wow, that's disappointing. I thought they were perfect, But so I love that the Bible holds David in honor, but yet shows the real side of the story. And it's encouraging for people like me who have made mistakes. And you could say, it's okay. I mean, obviously we're not trying to make mistakes. We're not trying to sin, but we don't have to live with that pressure of having to be completely perfect, and know that even in our imperfection can still be used greatly of the Lord, and God can still work in us.
It's not over. That's the bottom line. Your life's not over because of those things that when you stepped aside. But and in our culture today, that's exactly what people, if they knew the story and they were trying to be argumentative about the spirituality of somebody, that's the very thing they would say. Well, what about, you're talking, oh, Rick, man, he's a great guy, and he goes to church, and he does this, and he's always been this great guy. Well, somebody who would want to destroy me or whatever would say, well, what about, have you not heard what he did? Back,
This is a horrible. Okay, this is one I can think of just recently, and it's a bad topic to get into. But we've been dealing with racism. We talked about that in Modern Christian Dads. I preached about it. I'm hot on the topic right now. But Drew Brees, the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, the other day talked about standing for the flag and really upset the black community. And for 15 years, he's invested in New Orleans and given money to all kinds of ethnicities beyond just the black community, but is very held in high esteem, specifically in the black community. And those comments he made about the flag, basically some people were like, well, that just, now he should never be able to ever speak again regarding, it's like, what?
I know.
What? Like one statement, now he can never be, used again as a voice of hope in the black community and other communities, which he is, he just recently gave $5 million to the city of New Orleans to help the homeless and hungry. And I was just kind of taken back by that. But again, to not hop onto that specifically, but to just say, David, that God didn't wipe the slate, after Uriah could have even because listen, if anyone knows justice, it's God knows justice. He could have said, no, that's just too big. I will remove the kingship, remove the calling, and I can easily position that to someone else. He didn't do that. He still gave restoration in that situation. And
so the whole thing with Uriah too, he didn't say except for Bathsheba. He said except for Uriah because, and I know both of them are similar because they both were involved in the problem, but by mentioning Uriah, he mentions all of David's faults because with Uriah it became lying, cheating, adultery, deception, murder. All of those things became involved when you mention Uriah's name. we all say, well, what about Bathsheba? But the Bible says, what about Uriah? With Bathsheba, we would have said, well, David just had an affair, like it was a one little fault. But mentioning Uriah mentions that wasn't that David just had one fault in his life. With Uriah, it was several. I mean, it was murder.
Yep.
In our time, we'd say he should be in prison the rest of his life, and we don't have a lot of mercy like God does, and we need to be reminded of these stories, because the first time some guy steps into the pulpit and somebody knows his faults, they start, well, I'm not going to listen to anything he says now, because I know what he did. So anyway, verse 6, there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam throughout Abijah's life. So again, just mentioning the things that we've mentioned over and over again. 15, 7, and 8, as for the other events of Abijah's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? There was war between Abijah and Jeroboam, and Abijah rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, and Asa his son succeeded him as king. Again, you'd have to have like the kind of the family tree, if you would, to keep up with all this. You'd have to have them listed. Okay, this guy was this guy's son, and this guy died, and then somebody else took over. So it'd be extremely hard, unless you're really a scholar, to keep up with all of these guys. But and the thing about the way some of these things are counted, if you really are a detailed person and you begin to look at this, like, well, I thought, how could he have reigned this many years if the other guy reigned this many years? Well, everything was counted from the month of Nisan, which would have been our April, but everything was counted for there. So if it says that a guy was king for 3 years, if he became king one day before Nisan, and then he was king from Nisan to Nisan, that would be 2 years, even though it was 1 day prior. And then if he died the next day after Nisan, you would say he was king for 3 years. Technically, if you counted the days, he'd be in king for 1 year and 2 days. But those 2 days were on both sides of Nisan, so they counted as 3 years. So sometimes when you're looking at these things, it wasn't in actuality that many years. It was just because of the way that they were counted. So 15, 9, and 10. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 41 years. His grandmother's name was Maacah, daughter of Absalom. So that's kind of going back to verse 1 that we read. Sounds very similar, but now it's talking about daughter of Absalom. The King James says that this Maacah was his mother, but it was a grandmother. Anyway, again, it gets too complicated here. But and part of it was being mentioned because she actually did do some good things. So in spite of the fact we talked about she was known for idol worship, she actually had done some good things. And so, it works both ways. Just because somebody's righteous and we think they're perfect, they do have some faults. And on the other side of that, even though some of these people seem to be very evil, sometimes they still have some good things that come about. So you can't lump somebody into either thing. It's just like you were talking about with Drew Brees. I mean, just because he did this one thing that was, quote, bad, then you take away all the good.
Right.
And you can do it the other way around. You could talk about, we won't mention names, but you could talk about another NFL player that we don't see anything but terrible things out of him. But then somebody says, well, yeah, but he donated $1 million to anti-abortion clinic, or so but we do that as people. We lump people, we put them in the scales. Yes. They have more good things or bad things, and then that's what we try to dwell on. But anyway, verse 11, Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. So here you go, as David had done. Again, probably tired of hearing about it, but and he was not David's son. It says as David his father, it's a descendant. So, the Word of God uses that a lot as it calls somebody a son of someone, just means a descendant of them, not necessarily their son. Verse 12, he expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his father had made. So again, it begins talking about some of the good things that they had done. The King James says, when it talks about male shrine prostitutes, the King James says the sodomites. And so when it talks about these, the male shrine prostitutes, it's not only talking about just the issue of prostitution. So those male prostitutes were not just being hired by women to perform. They were being hired, the King James says sodomites. They were being hired by other males. So those male shrine prostitutes were not just prostitutes. They were prostitutes for men. Mm-hmm. So it was an issue of homosexuality that goes all the way back. Again, we think, this must be some new genetic thing or this new thing. Homosexuality is something new. And, you can look back, again, thousands of years ago, there was homosexual issues,
Yep.
And these were shrine prostitutes. These were people who were prostituting at the temple gates, basically, for people who came in. So people who were coming in to worship God were homosexuals and prostitutes and, all of these people under the, if I sacrifice to God, it won't matter about my sin. That's really kind of the idea of this. I think that's why it mentions so much of this. Verse 13, he even deposed his grandmother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive Asherah pole. Asa cut the pole down and burned it in the Kidron Valley. It was called, if you look at the King James and in the Hebrew, it's a mifphaless was what it was called. It was fearful and awe-inspiring. It instilled fear in those who looked at it. So it wasn't a God of love and mercy and grace and compassion when this God was created to instill fear. And I believe, for us, I've always believed I shouldn't serve God just out of fear of God, but I also believe that I should have fear of God. So, but in this case, it wasn't about making a God that would make people, I'm so in love with this God and he's so beautiful and all. It was more about you need to be, if you have enough fear of this God, then you'll do what we said the God said to do. Because the God that God didn't speak to them. They couldn't go up there, he said to do this. It had to be, in a sense, it had to be a political situation, because if people walked up there and looked at that God didn't speak any words to them. They had to believe that God spoke to somebody else, and they told them. So it's fake news. That's the favorite saying right now. It would be almost the same issue. Somebody's coming up and saying, I know you didn't hear from the God, but let me tell you what he said. So God says for you all to do this. And this is, again, it's always hard to talk about, because some things in the Bible, it's like, I don't want to be offensive. I know it's there. I know it's in the scripture. I know the meanings behind it. But this God was called a Priapus God. And I don't know whether that's a medical term, and it has to do with, I don't know how to say it. They made the God where women could have sexual relations with it. So I don't know how else to say that. I think you get that. But if you want to look up that word and see what that word is, you can look up the word priapus or priapism. Is a medical term for a male. You can look that up. So we'll just leave it at that. But
we can, we're on Facebook Live. We have the technology to show Do you want me to? I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah, we better move right along.
Just keep
on that
showing
one.
the Bible scriptures, pulling them up. Okay.
Yeah, we better just do that. So, but this God brought calamities and judgment on people. It was called that Priapus God, and then it was Pan was part of the name of the god. From panic, came from the word panic. So it was all about scaring people into serving this God. And again, I believe in a message of heaven. I believe in a message of how wonderful God is, how loving God is, how merciful, all those things. I believe in that, but I also believe that people need to understand that God gets angry, that he's an angry God, and that I don't want to make God mad. Some people, you can say, I don't care if they get mad at me or not. This is what I think, and I don't care if they like me or not. I really would like for God to like me. I don't want to make God mad. And so I want to be, the old song, I want to be a friend of God. But one good thing he did, and we'll start wrapping up here, but one good thing he did, it says he deposed his grandmother, which is a hard thing to do when it comes to family. So he would have to be a pretty godly man with high morals to say, Grandma, I'm sorry, but I'm firing you. I mean, you're out of here. Most people, and I think that's always been the danger. I'm not going to say it can't work, because it has worked in places, but it is a danger of having family as staff members. If your son becomes the youth pastor, and again, I'm not saying that that can't happen. I don't mean that, but I have seen it in problems because what the people say then, if they don't like your son as the youth pastor, well, the only reason he's there is because he's the pastor's son. If he's anyplace else, they would have fired him. People begin to get that idea that the only reason is because of special privilege that you have. So he did have high strength and morals. And when it says he began to tear down the idols, what would happen with an idol? If you were to take down an idol, it's not like if you have an idol sitting over here on your shelf, and you say, I need to tear down that idol. It's not about just taking the idol and throwing it in the trash can. It was very symbolic. When you took an idol down, it had to be torn down, broken into pieces, the materials out of that. So if it was a big wooden box, you can't say, well, I'm not going to throw that away, man. That's some nice oak. I'm going to use that to build me a new man cave. That was not the way it was supposed to be done. When you tore it down, it was completely. The materials can't be used for anything else. It had to be burned up, and not only that, but the ashes were supposed to be carried to the sea and thrown in the sea. So it was a complete removal of that thing. It wasn't, and again, you could use that for any of the gods we have. I've heard of people say, we used to have a Ouija board, and we played with that Ouija board, but man, God really convicted us, and so we put it in the closet. You probably should have taken that thing. I'm not saying you have to destroy it, burn it, throw the ashes in the sea, but there needs to be a complete cutting off of things sometimes, instead of I'm going to get rid of it, but I want to hang on to a little bit. I remember one of the big things when I was a teenager was rock and roll music, and the thing was they wanted you to take your albums home.
This was the pre-Petra days, right?
Yeah, right.
Or whatever the original were.
Yeah, throw your albums away, burn them in the fire, or whatever. But that does make some sense. You can't, the alcoholic, if you're going to quit, you can't dump it all out and save a half a bottle because, just in case, it's a total cutting off of sin out of our life. So,
and we really, the brevity of that, I was talking with a youth in our church this last week, and this particular youth was talking about, severe struggles in their life. But I know some of the things that this youth listens to, watches, And I was like, hey, what do you think about some of the stuff you listen to, watch? I think that might facilitate some of the struggles you're having, and trying to get people to understand how important that is. I was ministering to someone a while back that was having severe marriage problems. And one of the issues was gaming, and as I'm sitting there talking to this individual, the kids are little kids and they're gaming the whole time we're talking, and they're gaming to like adult games, if you will, because when you, what is that,
rating,
the rating, what adult, mature, et cetera. But I'm like, yeah, if you're, 5-year-old is exposing them to that for multiple hours a day, I can't imagine what's going to be in their spirit, their mind, their heart, their psyche, their emotions, all those kind of things. So,
yep, it's a total removal. So it's a good lesson for us to stop with today. So
awesome. Well, thank you for listening to Grace Point, Grace Point Daily, verse by verse. Dr. R.B. Maynard taking us through each and every week. If you want to come check out the live experience, he will be tonight at Grace Point teaching the word. Are you in 1Kings 15 tonight?
Yep.
Okay, so you don't have to come to church tonight because you are.
Everybody stay home tonight.
It's way better in person.
And I'll be signing autographs.
Exactly. So, hey guys, thanks for joining us on Grace Point Daily, verse by verse. We'll talk to you guys next time.